state leaders from across the political spectrum call on an Orleans County senator to resign after taking part in a racist Young Republicans group chat.
We should reject any of what we saw in that article. We should reject it out of hand. No tolerance, zero tolerance for that.
Plus, Governor Scott announces the first steps in a plan to address public safety concerns in Burlington, and one of the state's largest LGBTQ+ organizations closes indefinitely. All that and more ahead on Vermont This Week.
From the Vermont Public Studio in Winooski, this is Vermont This Week. Made possible in part by the Lintilac Foundation and Milne Travel. Here's moderator Mitch Wertlieb.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Friday, October 17th. And with us on the panel today, we have Liam Elder Connors from Vermont Public, Calvin Cutler from WCAX, and Auditi Guha from VTDigger. Thank you all so much for being here today. Well, we've got quite a story to talk about at the top here, something that has made national news and not in a good way. It does involve Vermont. For those of you who may not know the story, the background is that there was a group chat among some young Republicans in several states throughout the country, and the texts were leaked by Politico. These were unmistakably racist, anti-Semitic comments that were made. There were jokes about sexual assault. It wasn't great. Now, the reason we're talking about this on today's show is because one of the people involved in this chat was a state senator from Orleans County named Samuel Douglas. And before we get into the meat of what happened here, let's hear from Senate Majority Leader Keisha Hinsdale and a resident from Orleans County talking about these texts.
It certainly means a lot that we are all joining together to say that this is not okay. This is a very painful day for senators in Vermont, but certainly not as painful as the many Vermonters that are reading these statements that are incredibly hurtful to Jewish people, gay people, Black people, even Indian people.
That's not what we voted for as a representative. That doesn't represent North Troy. That doesn't represent Orleans County.
Okay, so you're hearing there from a couple of people reacting to these texts. Now, we should say that when this was made public, Governor Phil Scott, as you saw at the beginning there, was pretty outraged. He called on Samuel Douglas, again, this sitting state senator from Orleans County, to resign. Scott Beck, the head of the minority head of the Republican Party, also called on Douglas to resign. We should say that at the time that we are taping right now, Samuel Douglas has not said that he would resign. He has talked about this. He said he's going to weigh over that decision. By the time you're seeing it, he may have actually resigned by the time you're watching the show. We don't know. But at the time that we are taping, he has not. So Liam Elder Connors, let me turn to you. What do we know about what Samuel Douglas has said about his role in this racist group chat?
He said that he was in that group chat for procedural reasons due to with this young Republican group that he was a part of, and that he denied seeing any of these number of racist and sexist and anti-Semitic messages that were in the text messages. He said he didn't see those. He only checked it periodically. There is one message in there that appears to have come from Samuel Douglas, where he is mocking the bathing habits of people from India. But he has denounced all he called them vile comments, but says he also didn't see them at the time they were coming in. At least that's what his stance is.
These happened over several months' time, though, right? I mean, it sort of strains credulity to hear him say that he wasn't aware of a lot of these comments.
Yeah, I mean, he's only released a written statement. He has not spoken, as far as I know, to members of the press or the media and explained further than this. I mean, I think that would clearly be a question that we would all ask, but he hasn't made himself available to that.
Yeah, and I mean, I can understand, and to be clear, I mean, he said that he has cut ties with all of the individuals that are part of this group chat, and they're also, many of them are facing blowback in their own communities and in their own backyards as well, in Kansas and in New York. But, when you work in politics, Sam Douglas, he is, part of a young Republican sort of infrastructure nationally. And so when you're involved in politics, it's not uncommon to have group chats on Discord like this that, will just be firing away. It's not necessarily a text chain on his phone, but this was a Discord group chat. So it's not uncommon to have these types of things. But to your point, these racist references were made over 100 times over weeks and months. So to your point, we haven't heard directly from him in an interview. We haven't gotten to ask questions. But it is remarkable. And this is the first time in a really long time that almost everybody in Vermont's political community is really coming out swinging against this. The progressives put out a statement. The governor and Scott Beck, as you said, called on him to step down. Democrats, of course, are calling for him to step down. So opposition to this has been pretty swift. But we'll have to see exactly what happens.
There is an interesting sort of subset here, though, about the reaction from the local Republicans here, because Paul Dame, who is the chairman of the Republican Party in Vermont, initially came out and did not call on Samuel Douglas to resign. What he said was these were vile comments. He decried them. But he said that Douglas should explain himself, should apologize to the community, and then if he did not do that, then Dame said that he would call on him to resign. But the Republican Party here in Vermont did not align with that, right? In fact, they redacted those comments, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think right here, Paul Dame is walking a very fine line, right? I mean, he's trying to give Sam Douglas an out, I think it's fair to say, and say, hey, apologize if you want, but also, step down if you want to. But, I mean, if you're Paul Dame too, there is the bigger question about the balance of power in the Senate. I mean, Sam Douglas, he ran a race against Catherine Sims last year, who in the Orleans district race, and potentially, we'll see how next year's elections go, but we could be looking at a pretty fine balance of power potentially in the Senate, or Republicans might be able to take the Senate back. So not to say this is just aimed at politics here, but I think there is a political backdrop to this of whether he stays in his seat or not, and what does that mean for policy outcomes at the State House?
Well, he was part of he's a first-term state senator. He was part of the historic red wave of Republican, that came into the State House, and Phil Scott endorsed him in the run, and so he's 27, he's young, and now facing this pretty intense scrutiny and blowback, and Phil Scott pretty quickly calling on him to resign. I think that was one of the first official statements I saw about this. It wasn't from the Democrats, it was from Phil Scott's office, and it was pretty unequivocal. He didn't waste any time in calling for the resignation and denouncing the comments.
And just the last point of this I'll make is, the condemnation here in Vermont has been pretty swift, but if you look at the national level, Vice President J.D. Vance opined and weighed in on this issue as well, and he didn't necessarily condemn it. He basically said, these things will happen, and young people need to take responsibility for their actions. But
he called them kids.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, look, he went further than that. J.D. Vance gave more of an out than Paul Dame did, for sure, to this kind of behavior. He said he basically was saying, look, kids will be kids. Samuel Douglas is 27 years old. He was the highest profile political person, certainly, in this group chat. None of the other people involved were sitting state senators, as I understand it. But that view from the very top, Calvin, you make a good point here. If you're looking at the Vice President of the United States representing the Republican Party saying, oh, well, these are young people, they're just kids. They're not kids. A lot of these people were in their 30s. And the comments, I cannot stress enough, I'm not saying go look at them because they're super disturbing, but if you did stumble upon these comments and you didn't have the context, know that they were, from a political group, you'd think you were in some of the seediest parts of a den troll on the dark web. I mean, they're really that bad.
We'll have to see what comes of this. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah. What about, and let's speculate on this just a little bit before we move on this topic. And Audie, I want to get your thoughts on this too. But do we think that Samuel Douglas is going to resign? Start with you, Audie.
Well, I have a feeling if he hasn't resigned already, he probably doesn't. But that said, we'll have to wait and see. Maybe he's weighing his options.
Calvin,
I'd say the same. We have no reason to think if he didn't step down originally in his first statement, he said something, he'd be speaking out by the end of the week. We'll have to wait and see. I don't know if I can opine one way or the other, but I would not be surprised if he did not step down.
I hate asking reporters to speculate, by the way, just so you know. I know that's not you guys.
It's not really in our wheelhouse
I
most of the
totally know
time.
it is. I have to ask you, though, too, Liam. Do you think Samuel Douglas is going to resign over this?
I think I would be surprised if he did. we've all said if he hasn't already. I think the more interesting question is if he doesn't resign, what kind of blowback he faces in the Senate, if he's going to be stripped of any committee positions, and if he's going to be, how his role in as a senator could change if he chooses not to resign. And perhaps that is something that he is considering. Again, it's hard, you don't want to speculate, but that is certainly something that if he stays in, we'll see what happens. I mean, Democrats still control the chamber and are still involved in committee assignments, obviously.
And of course, the voters in Orleans County could ultimately have the final say when re-election comes up. True. All right. We'll gladly move off this story for a moment. However, as we move on to our next story here, there are some tendrils here. And Auditi, Guha, you were writing about the resignation of the Northfield police chief who's leaving his job, in fact, leaving the state. Who are we talking about here, and why did he feel he had to leave? Yes.
Well, Pierre Gomez was hired by the select board in Northfield, which is in a small town in Washington County, in September 2023. So it's exactly 2 years. And from everything that he has told me, he claims that racial discrimination and harassment has followed since day one of his job. And it seems like he's finally had it, and he submitted his resignation this week, effective November 1. But what's even worse is that he's not just leaving the town and his position, he's leaving Vermont because he's had it. He's going back to Philadelphia.
And what kind of things was he talking about that he experienced over that 2-year time?
It's a litany of issues. It's people not taking him seriously. It's people bringing up really small, frivolous issues. On Monday's select board meeting in Northfield, the former chief, Helfant, who no longer lives in town, asked the select board about why the chief was allowed to buy 3 hoodies for his team and with what money. And so, it's in the vein of that. Most of the complaints I've seen or heard about have nothing to do with his actual policing work, but it's all about something he said or what he wore. One time there was a big outcry because he wore a hoodie in town, and the townspeople actually came out in huge support at the next meeting, all wearing hoodies. So he does have a lot of resident support, but it seems like there are people within government and past employees of the town who seems to be on a campaign to discredit him.
And as far as his credentials and the job he was doing, I mean, wasn't he a pretty highly decorated officer when he worked in Philadelphia?
Yes, he was. He was a detective. He worked in the AG's office there. And as far as I've seen, there haven't been any complaints or any issues with his actual work. And the select board, one select board member said that they were very impressed with him, which is why they hired him, and they are very upset that he's chosen to leave.
And it's a sad story, and there's a final line in your piece, in your article, where he explains why he's going back to Philadelphia, right?
Yep.
And what did he say there?
He basically said he hopes to go back to Philadelphia in January, and within quotes, where they celebrate diversity.
Okay. Yeah, again, we're looking at these issues coming up in Vermont. We're not immune to them here, and I appreciate your reporting on that. Thank you for updating us on that story. Calvin Cutler, I want to turn to you now on a story that's really foreboding, I guess is the word I would choose here. There's food and fuel assistance that's at risk for low-income Vermonters. This is sort of tied up with the federal government shutdown that's going on right now. Explain how it is that come November 1st, I believe, there are folks who use the SNAP benefits, the nutritional assistance program here in Vermont, that could not be able to use their cards.
Yeah, the government shutdown is in week 3 now, and of course, federal money goes to a lot of state programs. There's a lot of programs that are not affected, like WIC and Reach Up, and some of those programs are still funded. But there's a couple of really key programs like LIHEAP and especially SNAP benefits, or 3 Squares Vermont, that are going to be facing a cliff in the next few weeks. And what we learned today, the state lawmakers basically had one of these sort of hours-long sessions to hear what's the impact of the shutdown and what money do we have and where can we draw from and how long can we withstand this. There is a growing concern that under the government shutdown, when you get a SNAP card, right, it's got a little chip on it or a little bar, and that's what you scan at the grocery store. The program is funded. We have the money, but the vendor that the federal government uses to dispense those cards and digitally transfer the funds from the accounts of the benefit recipients to the vendor, to the grocery store, that government vendor is not getting paid, and they might go under. And so there's a real concern that when people go to check out at the grocery store, you swipe your card and nothing happens, and there's no way to deliver the money. And there really is not an easy workaround in this in the short term. The state can't necessarily cut checks or give people coupons. I mean, they're really lawmakers were just getting this news and we're trying to understand it in real time. But if that comes to fruition in about 2 weeks, that could be really detrimental to about 65,000 or so Vermonters that rely on these benefits. Some people do get, food benefits like from they can go to an ATM and take money. Some people receive benefits that way. But the most recipients get these 3 Squares Vermont cards, which in 2 weeks' time may not work.
So I'm trying to get my brain wrapped around this because I know that state officials have said, we have money we've set aside for just this kind of contingency in case something like this happens. But what you're saying is there's no way to actually physically get the money to the people who need it.
Correct. Yeah. Well, the SNAP money, there's no way to get that money to program recipients. More broadly, in terms of how long can the state withstand the shutdown, and if other programs like LIHEAP or WIC or what have you are in jeopardy, the state does have about $800 million in the treasurer's office in cash reserves that can be moved really quickly. But the other question is, what will we be reimbursed for? In the past, during past government shutdowns, we have been reimbursed for paying out benefits and et cetera to states. But there's no guarantee this time around. The politics of this shutdown is unlike anything that we've seen before. And so there is a real open question of whether we will be paid back from the federal government if we essentially have to loan ourselves money.
We're going to have to watch what happens in just a couple of weeks, you're saying, too.
In just a couple of weeks. And so now, like state lawmakers, I will say the emergency board is going to be meeting in a few weeks to kind of understand what programs can we fund, what should we fund, how long can we fund these. There's a lot of unknowns right now, and this is definitely going to spill into the state legislative session in January.
That's a tough one. Let's move on to public safety in Vermont's largest city, Burlington. And there are some concerns about backlogs of cases, how to deal with low-level offenders and centering on crime. Let's hear a couple of statements about what some of these problems are.
These folks are cycling back through so many times. It's not good for them. It's not good for the victims. A smaller group of people is taking up a huge amount of time and taking up a lot of that docket space in our court system.
If the Community Accountability Court can change the way people think and act, it will be hugely successful. If all it does is bring conventional punishment to bear a little bit faster, I'm not quite as optimistic.
Okay, Liam Elder Connors, let's talk about what the governor is doing here. He's trying to address public safety. And so what are these first new steps he's looking at?
Well, essentially what he is doing is he's appointed a special prosecutor to go to Chittenden County and to focus on cases, or individuals, I should say, who have multiple open cases. This has been something that people have been concerned about, not just in recent years, but actually for a really long time. Basically, the whole time that I've been a reporter covering this issue, people have been concerned about it. But it's just been intensified recently with the rise in homelessness. There's more public drug use. There's a lot of public safety concerns and concerns about that there are people that have multiple cases who are causing the majority of these issues that people are seeing out in public. So this new, they're calling it an accountability court, is just going to focus on those individuals.
Calvin Cutler, you've been covering this as well. I'm interested in what Robert Sand was saying there about this, about how this could work and could not work. I mean, what are some of the pitfalls?
I think the core question, and we've been hearing this a lot in the legislature when they were talking about alleviating the court backlog, is trying to have swift and certain consequences for your actions closer to the time that event happened. So whether the accountability is incarceration, restorative justice, drug or alcohol treatment, whatever that intervention may be, the philosophy is that the sooner that happens to the alleged crime, that will be the deterrence. I think that still remains an open question here. So I think that's one piece of this. And then also the other question too is the resources. Once these people are held accountable, do we have the drug and alcohol treatment resources? Do we have the space in our correctional facilities, which a lot of people have said our jails are under immense stress. So I think those are kind of the two of the big unknowns here, but we'll see.
I think there are still a lot of questions about exactly how this is going to operate. And some of the people I talked to, there's a judge who's been appointed, Martin Maley. He's a retired Superior Court judge who will be overseeing it. Zach Waite, who's a deputy state's attorney in Washington County, is going to be the special prosecutor. There'll be public defenders assigned to this court as well. But I still have a question about if the intended outcome is going to be what everybody thinks it's going to be. And I think they're not going to suspend the rules of criminal procedure. They still have to follow Vermont law. I mean, the bail statute is something that people have been frustrated by for years. And bail is not something that can be imposed for public safety reasons. It's just if someone's a flight risk. Now, what could happen is that people are going to be able to move through this court more quickly, and they might not be out and have the chance to reoffend, and the cases are going to get disposed more quickly. Because that has been a problem where people have low-level cases that linger for a long time. It's not quite a high enough level case to be incarcerated for, and they pick up more charges while they're out. So faster disposition might have an effect on that. But again, I think we have to sort of see how this is actually going to operate and what happens. And I think what people think is going to happen with it the details of it, I think, are going to be really important.
The devil's always in the details, as it turns out. When is this all supposed to happen? Is it underway? Is it?
So Monday, the governor said he hopes the court will launch on Monday. I mean, I think I've not confirmed for sure yet if we're going to start hearing cases, but I think probably next week is what it sounds like. Okay, really appreciate the update on that, Liam and Calvin. Thank you. A story that we have been, sort of trying to get to for a while now, and because there's been so much other news, it's sort of kind of pushed it away, but we must talk about it because it's a big deal. The Pride Center of Vermont is closing indefinitely. Audie, you've been covering this. I guess the best news you can say is that the help hotline will still be running, but tell us about what's happening with this well-known center in Vermont.
Yes, so the Pride Center of Vermont has existed since 1999, and last Friday the board of directors suddenly announced that they were going to close, if not forever, then definitely indefinitely, particularly because they have a huge gap in funding, and they get their funding from various sources, including state and federal funds. The news does come as a shock, not just to the Pride community, but also to its employees, because 7 employees were laid off immediately. But since then, the board has come back to say that they have partnered with STEPS Vermont, which is a domestic violence organization that has a hotline, so people calling the Pride Center's Safe Support hotline will be rerouted there. The good thing about this is that the Pride Center's hotline was not 24/7, but this one is, so people will be able to access hotline and chat support around the clock.
What kind of things are going to be lost, though, with the closing of the center? As you say, it's been in operation since 1999. What kind of services did they provide, or what kind of events did they back, that sort of thing?
I have heard that they have basically been a major center where LGBTQ people in Vermont can go to and find a safe space. But beyond that, they offer all kinds of programs, including HIV testing and mental health support. And these are all programs that remain suspended. The board did say that they're trying to see if they can create more partnerships with other statewide organizations and asking people to step in and donate. They're in a $350,000 shortfall. And so the hope is that people are going to step up, and organizations like this domestic violence organization will step up and help fill the gap that this closure has caused.
This news came as pretty somewhat of a surprise, or was it sort of expected?
It was a complete surprise. Even the employees were completely taken away.
And I will say, the reaction from the political community, Congresswoman Becca Balint was speaking out about this. A number of state lawmakers have. I think this is just one more organization, one more pot of money that when state lawmakers come back in January, will there be a conversation about funding, the Pride Center, and for a lot of people that utilize the resources there and find belonging in the community, it's a critical resource. And so this is just one more piece of competing interests that state lawmakers will have to grapple with when they return in January with pretty limited resources.
Okay. I would like to end on a somewhat positive note if we can. Audie, this is a story I know you've been covering. There's a historic opera house in Vergennes, which has been around for years and has served the community. But one thing they have not been able to do is serve the disability community. But there's an update on that. What do you have for us?
Yes, it's if anybody walks into the Vergennes Town Center, you'll see it immediately. It's a beautiful building. It was one of the famous national opera houses in its time, and it is still home to the town offices. However, on the second floor, there is an auditorium that has long kept up public events, community events, and well as music and dance shows. And the Friends group that operates it has fundraised $2.2 million to make much needed accessibility updates, which will allow everyone in Vermont's smallest city to access this building.
Thank you so much for that update. Good to go out on a high note there. Thanks to our panel today, Liam Elder-Connors from Vermont Public, Calvin Cutler from WCAX, and Auditi Guha from VTDigger. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. I appreciate you watching so very much, and I hope you'll tune in next week as well for Vermont This Week. In the meantime, I hope you have a great week, and tune in again, and we'll see you next week.